is to stand today with so many of you who at the beginning of this program stood when your branch of the armed service was mentioned. I hope each person in this audience, and especially my young children here today, noticed how many in the pews and especially in the choir stood when each branch's song was being sung. We are a blessed nation because of those who are willing to fight, to serve, and defend all that we hold dear. 243 years ago, in the year 1776, Thomas Jefferson was given the charge of putting the American colonies' collective plea for independence from the British throne into written form. The very next year, after the signing of that Declaration of Independence, the Second Continental Congress adopted the flag of the United States. Since then, though the detailed appearance of our national flag has at times been modified, the stars and stripes have been proudly waving as a symbol of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. President Calvin Coolidge said it best when he declared that we identify the flag with almost everything we hold dear on earth. It represents our peace and security, our civil and political liberty, our freedom of religious worship, our family, our friends, our home. We see in it the great multitude of blessings, of rights and privileges that make up our great country. But when we look at our flag and behold it emblazoned with all of our rights, we must remember that it is equally a symbol of our duties. Every glory that we associate with it is the result of duty done. For the first century of our country's independent existence, our servicemen and women valiantly fulfilled that duty as they bravely fought for freedom at home, first in the Revolutionary War, and then through future conflicts such as the War of 1812, which threatened to quickly overthrow our young nation's freshly obtained sovereignty. In the 1860s, our country was torn apart when in the bloody battles of the Civil War, the enemy changed from being another nation to a fellow American. Instead of fighting a foreign foe, brother fought against brother, father fought against son, and the very fibers of our union were left hanging by a thread. In the middle of that Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, calling upon Americans in both the North and the South to honor the blood of those who had laid down their lives in preservation of this union by committing themselves to living with a full measure of devotion to the principles originally put into words by Thomas Jefferson, exactly 47 years prior. Less than 50 years after the Civil War, the First World War broke out, and the United States military once again found itself in combat against a foreign foe. But something had shifted. This time, the battles were being waged in someone else's land, and the duty was to fight for someone else's freedom. As the liberty and security of the United States of America became more reputable and established, our military became engaged in the fight to liberate others. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War, and the post-9/11 wars against terrorism in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere have been fought with a dual purpose: the duty to preserve the American way of life, and the broader duty to advance the cause of freedom around the world. Some military campaigns have been more successful than others. Unfortunately, politics has often gotten in the way of the work being done by the boots on the ground. But the heroism and willingness of the brave men and women in uniform to sacrifice their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor should never be called into question. The trench warfare of the First World War exacted the cost of almost 120,000 American military lives before the international armistice was signed on November 11th of 1918. This past fall, we commemorated the 100th anniversary of this supposed war to end all wars. Of course, history has proven that worldwide war did not end with the signing of that great World War I armistice. Before another generation could even pass, we found ourselves again engaged in mortal combat as Adolf Hitler and his regime unleashed the battles of World War II. Once again, our brave men and women in uniform were shipped to duty stations around the world, allied with over a dozen other nations who were all united against a common foe and all committed to the preservation of the cause of freedom. Just this week, leaders of the modern free world gathered on the white cliffs of Dover in England and on the beaches of Normandy in France to commemorate the collective Allied victory over the dictatorial Axis powers exactly 75 years ago in the battle that has come to infamously be known as D-Day. In less than 24 hours on that day, 10,000 Allied troops laid down their lives, and another 140,000 were equally willing, and yet by the providence of God not required to do so. Those who dutifully stormed the beaches of Normandy were defending much more than the American way of life. They were defending the very cause of freedom. More than self, more than even our own one nation under God. As is true of every American serviceman and woman who has worn the uniform of our armed services for the last century and proudly donned the emblem of our American flag on the shoulder of their uniform, those waging the battles of Normandy fought and died in defense of freedom all around the world. On the hours immediate leading up to the execution of the D-Day attacks, General Dwight D. Eisenhower rallied his men with the following words. He said, "The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. The freemen of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage and devotion to duty and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us beseech the blessing of Almighty God on this great and noble undertaking." Close quote. The eyes of the world were indeed upon them, and when the entire world was watching, the American and Allied forces did not disappoint. When the stars and stripes were floating as freedom's banner to the world took note. Both those who lived and those who died fought with honor, courage, and integrity, willing to fight and sacrifice and defend even unto the death someone else's freedom. There is a reason we call those who lived through the horrors and the honors of World War II the greatest generation, because everyone in that generation was impacted by that war. Everyone. You were either serving in it yourself, sending your sons off to battle, praying for your sweethearts somewhere else around the world, working in a factory at home to support the war effort, or rationing your every commodity in order to preserve supplies for the troops. Everyone felt it. The burden was borne not only by those who were willing to die in the horrors of war, but by those who were called upon to live through the same. Those of us today who have been fortunate enough to have inherited a time of relative peace and prosperity cannot be so arrogant as to squander away the very freedoms that have been paid for by the shedding of sacred blood. General Eisenhower also issued a warning cry. History does not long entrust the care of freedom to the weak or timid. Close quote. We cannot be weak or timid in our capacity as the living caretakers of the freedoms for which so many have died. The United States flag represents those freedoms, and honor, courage, fortitude, the capacity to overcome obstacles and overlook shallow and surface level differences. The flag represents the blood that has been shed, woven into the very fibers of each red stripe billowing in the breeze. The flag represents purity and honor, with a battle cry for all of us to rise up with integrity as we see each white stripe wave. The flag represents unity in spite of personal diversity, with each of the 50 stars placed in an orderly sea of blue. We are to be one nation under God. We are to be united, for united we stand, and divided we fall. We are to call upon the better angels of our nature and rise up and answer the rallying cry to carry forth the God-given principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When you see the American flag fly, do you remember the sacrifices that have been offered for you? Do those memories instill in you a sense of duty, parallel to the duty fulfilled by those who have gone before? Does the fact that thousands upon thousands have paid the ultimate price for you to be able to enjoy freedoms not even imaginable to those of foreign lands or previous generations lead you to internalize the sense of duty that is embodied in that great flag? The simple but essential duties to be a little kinder, work a little harder, complain a little less, and serve a little more willingly? Are you a better husband or wife, father or mother, sister or brother, daughter or son, because someone else's husband or wife, father or mother, sister or brother, daughter or son laid down their lives for you? As the world commemorates 75 years since the Allied victories of D-Day, my 7 young children and I are about to commemorate 75 weeks since we bid farewell to my husband, Major Brent Russell Taylor, as he left the Salt Lake International Airport on his way to his 4th deployment to the Middle East as a soldier in the Utah Army National Guard. There is no way I will ever forget the emotions of that day, nor could I ever forget the emotions of his homecoming 10 months later. He did not return home as anticipated to the same local airport on a commercial flight, but rather was brought home to Dover Air Base in Delaware in a flag-draped casket. There, in the middle of the night leading up to our November election day, my 2 oldest sons and I witnessed firsthand the dignified transfer of their father's remains back onto American soil. Some moments can never be forgotten, and some images of the American flag can never be erased from the human mind. When you see Old Glory fly, what emotions are stirred in you? In your mind's eye, can you see the hour of deliverance and joyful triumph experienced by Francis Scott Key when in 1812 he awoke by dawn's early light to discover that our flag was still there? Is Joe Rosenthal's now iconic photographic image of 6 Marines working together to erect the American flag in Iwo Jima emblazoned in your mind? And what of the emotions we all felt almost 18 years ago on September 11th of 2001, when the Twin Towers fell and 3 brave firefighters found a pole in a pile of rubble and proudly raised the American flag in a profound proclamation that a great people had been moved to defend a great nation, and that the terrorist attacks of that day did not succeed in their efforts to dent the steel of American resolve. The price of freedom feels incredibly high. To all of us who know and love our individual soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine. But the value of freedom is immeasurable to all who know and love America and all she represents and all for which she stands, and the beautiful Star Spangled Banner that so freely waves over her. Yes, the price of freedom has always been high. But what if that price were not to be paid? We as a nation do hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And yet the price of freedom has been borne anything but equally. In the words of Winston Churchill, never was so much owed by so many to so few. A century ago, President Woodrow Wilson said, "The things that the flag stands for were created by the experiences of a great people. Everything that it stands for was written by their lives. The flag is the embodiment not of sentiment, but of history. That was true then in the midst of World War I, and it is true today. And it must remain true into the everlasting future of this great nation. We best honor those who have laid down their lives for us by making something honorable out of the lives they have given to us." To revisit the words of President Calvin Coolidge, we identify the flag with almost everything we hold dear on earth. It represents our peace and security, our civil and political liberty, our freedom and religious worship, our family, our friends, our home. We see in it the great multitude of blessings, of rights and privileges that make up our country. But when we look at our flag and behold it emblazoned with all of our rights, we must remember that it is equally a symbol of our duties. Every glory that we associate with it is the result of duty done. God be thanked for every man and every woman who has ever saluted that flag and then been called upon to pay the ultimate sacrifice in defense of the duties represented by that flag. And may God bless every angel mother, every valiant father, every broken-hearted sweetheart, every beloved sibling, and every weeping child who are left behind to experience the great pride, the deep honor, and the profound humility that comes with the territory of having contributed to the incalculable price of freedom. Above all, may God bless each of us to be stirred and awakened to a sense of the duty that now falls to us, the duty to be anything but weak or timid as the caretakers of freedom, the duty to do our part to maintain this land of the free, and to be worthy to also be counted among the brave. And I leave this with you in the name of our Savior, the very founder of freedom and the liberty of our souls, even Jesus Christ. Amen.